Hi and welcome to the Bruce channel. I'm Bruce and delighted you've chosen to spend some of your life here with us, so thank you very much indeed. Happy spring. Now, doesn't that sound good? All right, together now, breathe. Yeah, you know, from year to year and varying from place to place, it's almost always a tough winter somewhere, and that's always relative too. Chances are, objectively, Cleveland, where I'm from, will have a longer, colder, snowier winter than where I am in North Carolina. And meteorologically, that's Greensboro. Cleveland's average annual snow total is 56 inches. Greensboro's is 7.1. But in a given year, if Cleveland had, say, 20 inches, that would be for an easy winter there. But here, 20 inches would be epochal. It would never be forgotten. Now this year's clear winner, maybe loser is more apropos, is Boston. There is still time for more to fall, but the National Weather Service official totals earlier this month showed Bangor, Maine, got the most snow with 121 inches. That's a lot. And it is more than double their average of 54.4. Remember the huge snow that Buffalo took in November, 5, 6 feet, even more, just one storm. Well, they ended the year at 109 inches. Their average is 83.1. They beat it by quite a bit, but Boston, and I hope they don't get any more, was standing earlier this week at 107.6 inches. Now that's not as much as Buffalo or Bangor, but their average, what they've got the equipment and manpower and budget for, is 36.8, which means if they get not so much as another flake, they're at 290% of their average. That's almost 3 times normal. And if they got 4 more inches, it would be officially 3 times. Boys and girls, can you spell shattered, as in shatter the record book? Okay, I want to mention a letter I got from a viewer who wrote, "You talked about infomercials. Is everything bad?" No, certainly not. I have a Total Gym. That's the gym apparatus that Chuck Norris talks about in the infomercial. And really, it's a fine enough piece of equipment. And I wish I still had the translucent clip-on thingies for your sun visor. Now that it's spring, and the sun is higher in the sky, I don't miss them quite as much as I did a few months ago, but I do appreciate them, even in summer. And I wish I knew where they were. Too many moves. But back to the question, no. What I hope to convey was this: infomercials are not interviews, they're little stage plays. They're scripted. And if a gadget, for example, is poorly designed and is prone to break in real life, were that to happen on a shoot, it doesn't survive the editing process. But where it's really essential to be wary and do some research, food supplements, FDA approval isn't required to sell them. That doesn't mean they're bad. I follow a supplemental vitamin regimen and more. There is a food supplement that I'll tell you about sometime that has shown me, personally, tremendous results. But my recommendation would be Google the product, read the reviews, and then especially if they are stated, see how returns are handled. Oh, from an infomercial, this picture, I thought it was cute. The host and his guest are using this big Larry King-style old-fashioned microphone. But if you look again, both are really wearing lavalier mics. So big deal. I have one of those too. But not only do I have one of these, I have one of these, like Frank Sinatra used.
Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. America and all the ships at sea.
Here's something I was reminded of. Sharing is good. I noticed earlier this week several friends had posted pics from a concert they'd gone to. Fleetwood Mac was in town this week. Really? I hadn't known. Lots of people shared they'd been there. But if someone had shared in advance they were going, well, maybe I'd have gone. I got to get out there. Anyway, I want to share this with you. This is a little factoid, I think would be the proper term. And I learned of it some number of years ago. I don't recall where I learned of it. And I don't even know that it is fact. And if it is always true, I don't know why that's so. I don't know the scientific reason. But what I do know is that since I learned of it in my personal experience, it has always worked. So, in 2 weeks, it will be Easter. Time is of the essence. In 2 weeks, many of you will likely be making Easter eggs. It's another holiday that has expanded beyond its original margins, and ham and hard-boiled eggs and Easter egg hunts are enjoyed by many, not only Christians. Well, here's the thing. Likely you found over your life, as have I, that sometimes it's very easy to peel the shell from a hard-boiled egg. And sometimes it's seemingly held on by super glue. When it is, it's tedious and very annoying when you get one of those. So here's the secret. If you don't already have your eggs, get them today. I'm serious. See, eggs safely refrigerated keep for a long, long time. Months. But what I learned was, to get easy peeling shells, the egg should be at least 2 weeks old. That's it. That's the secret. Longer is even better. But if you get and boil them fresh, you will be in for a tedious, long peel. I'm sorry, that's just my mind ricocheting again, but doesn't that sort of sound like a name that would fit very well on a Southern senator? Senator Tedious Long Peel. All right, we'll be back in a bit, but first, here is a pithy phrase I'm sending you out with. And I know that at least 2 viewers will appreciate it. Here it is. Go hang a salami. I'm a lasagna hog.
Hey, let me tell you about my book, Shrink. For most of my adult life, I weighed a little over 100 pounds. Not much more than in this picture taken when I was about 17 and considering becoming a jockey. But as is often true, once I crossed into my 40s, extra weight came and it stayed. For years I tried to lose, instead gained, and ended up 153 pounds. And I'm embarrassed to show you this video. Then I learned that it isn't about calories and exercise, but instead it's about what you eat. You might say, sure, ice cream makes you fat. But there were surprises, things like orange juice not being such a wise choice if you're trying to lose weight. So I just made some basic changes to what I ate, not how much, and the weight just fell off. Now, nearly 3 years later, it is still off. And don't misunderstand, I'm eating foods I like, not bamboo shoots. Friends ask me how I did it so often, I put it in a book. It's available as an ebook for all platforms, and the print edition is available at barnesandnoble.com and amazon.com. Hey, you can shrink too.
Remember, you can view all our previous shows at tinyurl.com/Bruce Channel. And if you're on Facebook, you can look for us by typing in The Bruce Channel. And write us at thebrucechannel@yahoo.com. All right. You may recall, about 2 months ago, before showing it to you, I gave you the background of a song that I wrote called A Lover's Prayer. I think it was the show called Redemption, if you wanted to reacquaint yourself with it. All right, at the time, I said it was one of the 2 best that I had ever written. That remains true. Today I'm going to show you the other one, but getting it to you hasn't been the easiest thing to accomplish. For one thing, it is difficult for me to listen to, for reasons soon to be clear. For another, it's become, no fault of its own, but it's become irrelevant. I'm as pleased with it as I ever was, but you have to know the motivation behind it, and no, for once it wasn't because I fell in love. I wrote it in, I think, June of 1995. Some of you will remember, and some of you won't, but in April of that year, we, as a nation, endured another of what is known as the indelible moment. Everyone knows where they were, what they were doing when they learned of the bombing of Pearl Harbor, when they learned of President Kennedy's assassination, learned of the Challenger disaster. Much more recently, watched the President announce Osama bin Laden's death. Okay. In June of 1995, everyone would have been able to recall where they were, what they were doing 2 months earlier, on April 19th, when they learned of the bombing of the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City. If you're too young to remember, a former U.S. Army veteran who had served in the first Gulf War filled a rental truck with explosives and parked it on the street directly in front of the building. which happened to be just feet from the building's daycare center. It was set with a timer, it blew up, and in an instant, lives were gone, lives were changed. As a nation, we immediately thought, Mideast terrorists, but it wasn't. We soon learned that it was Timothy McVeigh and his helpers. And why did this veteran do something so heinous? It remains virtually incomprehensible 20 years later. He had become radicalized, assuming viewpoints espoused by paramilitary groups. He'd been swayed by the argument that the U.S. government is aiming to take over every aspect of our lives to become a government, as George Orwell would have thought, a totalitarian state where the people have no voice, no say. A totalitarian state that brooks no dissent and no guns, easier to control the people that way. Why did he choose April 19th? Because on that date, 2 years earlier, a government siege of a cult came to a tragic end. It's a whole story in itself, but in short, the cult's leader, David Koresh, held his people spellbound as he told them he was the new Christ, and any day they were going to be overtaken by the government, and thus they needed lots of weapons. They were called the Branch Davidians. Well, the government learned that they had weapons, but see, not just weapons, automatic weapons, illegal machine guns, and maybe grenades. Now, some weapons need be illegal, no? If any weapon could be owned by anyone, well then, wouldn't that include rocket launchers? Or even nukes? Is that sane? And hunters don't need grenade launchers, so yeah, there are restrictions, and we should all be glad that there are. Or at least we should be if we want to feel safe at the ballpark or any other gathering. But the Davidians had illegal weapons, and after a siege of nearly 2 months, the FBI sent tanks to knock down the compound's walls. Unfortunately, it caught fire. The official report said that it was started by those inside. And rather than come out of the fire, most stayed inside and cooked. Now, some didn't have a choice in that. The religious cult leader, David Koresh, was reported by some who did get out to have shot those who were trying to leave. And that date, and that outcome, and that cause is what caused Timothy McVeigh to protest. His protest killed 168 people. I suppose, as well as citizens visiting the federal building to conduct some business of some sort, and aside from the children in the daycare center, there certainly were, obviously, some employees of the federal government. The enemy, to his way of thinking. Although I really doubt any single one of them was participating in a plan to impose totalitarianism on the rest of us. Likely, they were just people working at their job. So that June I was contemplating how we arrived at this, where a McVeigh, or anyone, of any belief was so certain of his own infallibility that he could judge others so evil and so flawed, and then sentence them blithely to death. I thought, this isn't possible. Can't we even talk to each other? Even if we meet and discuss, and then leave without having successfully persuaded the other, can't we agree to meet again? Are we just totally incapable of seeing that we're really more alike than different? So I wrote the song. It was not out of the desire to be opportunistic. Instead, I hoped, naively perhaps, that maybe if enough people heard it, and if they remembered the horror that they'd felt just 2 months previously, maybe they could also remember that, ultimately, we all want the same things. And since we have common goals, we should be able to find a way to commonly arrive at them. Well, the response was very favorable. I always heard good things about it. And I always hoped, too, that maybe someone like Peter, Paul, and Mary would hear it. Someone who could then get it to a wider audience, inasmuch as I'm not much of a marketer. But I dream big. And then, about 6.5 years later, I knew none of that would ever happen. Another indelible moment, the day the Twin Towers fell. 168 people being killed in Oklahoma City shocked us, but 9/11 killed just under 3,000. I never seriously considered reworking the lyrics. For one thing, 9/11 was brought about by non-Americans. And two, that would have been opportunistic.
An April morn, the day looked fine. A flash of light, and then we heard an awful roar. What was before was there no more. Time itself stood still a little after 9. I hear you crying, Oklahoma City. I see your tears and the searing pain. Maybe in all the debris and through all the misery, we'll see America together once again. We watched our screens, we felt dismay. We watched your heroes helping those still trapped inside. Some babies cried, some babies died, and others lived a while before they slipped away. I hear you crying, Oklahoma City. I see your tears and the wounds and the searing pain. Maybe in all the debris and through all the misery, we'll see America together once again. There was a time we respected one another, when we knew we could always get along. We could disagree, but we did so honestly. We knew our differences had made and kept us strong. We're rich and poor, we're young and old, we're red and yellow, black and white, but we're the same. We've all been shamed, we share the blame, allowing hate and revenge into the fold. I hear you crying, Oklahoma City. I see your tears and the wounds and the searing pain. Maybe in all the debris and through all the misery, we'll see America together once again. We'll see America together once again.
So that's the song, Oklahoma Morning. What I didn't know when I wrote it, in fact I would have bet the opposite, was that the civil hatred that divided us in 1995 wouldn't recede I genuinely thought that it would. I thought that we'd have been knocked back to our senses. But instead, that divide has grown to incredible proportions. And worse, seems to be accompanied now by a very ugly anger. In fact, in my opinion, at no time since Reconstruction has this country faced such a divide. We have indeed faced mortal danger. World War II was one. More likely a greater danger during the height of the Cold War. But the terrible irony is our greatest threat is now not from the outside, but instead our greatest threat is more akin to Walt Kelly's immortal words in his classic comic strip, Pogo: "We have met the enemy, and he is us." Don't misunderstand, I'm not smart enough to have the big answers we need. But I do know this: if we only are willing to continue along the path we are on, where we don't listen, don't try to understand, and only shout louder still, that path will ultimately lead us to a discovery none of us want. The discovery that a government of the people, this government, shall indeed perish from the earth. Listening to my song reminded me of these things, which is why it was hard to bring up here. So in the future, this is what I hope to do. I hope to still help you find a smile now and again. Doing so is central to my core and would be as impossible to avoid as breathing. I hope to find and bring to your attention useful things, such as today's mention of using older eggs for hard-boiled. I hope to occasionally inspire a written thank you to someone whose work is now perhaps forgotten and who might appreciate a thank you. And I hope to ask questions or follow chains of logic that, if my hope were to be fulfilled, might bring thought into the equation instead of more shouting. Because if we only shout at one another, we will doom ourselves and our children, and their children will wonder how we could have been so selfishly blind, and then they will curse us. It's spring. I do hope your upcoming week is the best you've ever had.